Video, I talked about an architecture for sending messages between clients through a server, and how every client would maintain a state of entities and components and be processed by systems, etc. So now let's dig through some code. So I have this class called Synergize, meaning put everything together. And the Synergizer's job is to create the scene and initialize the given systems. So it has context that is just a grab bag of things that each system might need. We can take a look at the context. And it includes such things as the who I am, the member ID, the scene itself, and Synergizer, so that one system could traverse to another system to maybe get some internal state, and then Signal Hub, which is used for messaging. So we create this is a function that can create context. It will return null for just about everything except for the Signal Hub. And in the constructor, let's just add some documentation here. It will take the member ID, an engine with a canvas, and any initial systems. And the reason I did this is so that we can test with some initial systems. You don't need to hook in systems that you don't care to test. So we have this constructor, and first we'll initialize that context. So we have a context, and then within context we'll populate the things that we know about. So Synergizer will be this. My member ID will be the member ID. The scene will be create the scene. And then I'll go through the list of systems and call the add system on each system. Then we'll start some listening, which is applicable to forward events and messages to each, for which systems themselves could be listening. And then we run the engine cycle. Let's see what create scene does. Create scene will store the engine. It will create a new Babylon scene, set a basic default clear color, and then create a default camera. So there is a free camera in the synthesizer, and we will just attach controls so you can have some basic navigation. And we'll set the quaternion rotations, so it has just some defaults. And there are some convenience functions for looking up a system by name or adding a system, which will just put it into an array of systems. So the add system will be given a system if the system already exists in the arrays. Then it will reject it. If it's not in there, it will initialize it with this context. And if the system has an init entity function, it will put it into the system for entities array. And then it will set it into the system's object. So we have an array of systems for entities and unique systems for all the systems. The reason why I separate them, or this is in duplicate, is whenever we're going to set up a listener, so anytime an entity is created, we'll run it through the systems for entities so that we can register it for those systems. So here's the setup listeners. We'll listen to the context signal hub incoming whenever there's an event. And so we might need to change this a little bit because maybe it's not listening for event. Signal hub is made up of local, incoming, and this was incoming events, which was these things about members, all of those, and then we pushed everything into event. So I want to redo this a little bit and say that incoming events or outgoing events have a type of entity created, in which case there's an ID, which is a string, and then components, which is a component object. And you can also have entity deleted, and that's ID for string, that's it. And then you can have component updated, which is a single component, so we'll have the entity ID, and then we'll have the name of the component, and then we'll have the data to patch, so data, which can be anything. We can also have component removed, which will be an entity ID and the name of the component, or component added, which would be the entity ID, the name, and the data. In both the cases of updated or added, it is upsert, so you just need one of them, component upsert. And yeah, I think that's fine. So we'll have these additional types of messages, and we'll deprecate this later. So those are the incoming events that you have, and likewise you can send these out. So incoming and outgoing. There's also a catch-all, which is custom message, which can just be any object. Okay, so now that we've expanded that, instead of listening for event, I want to listen particularly to entity created. listening to entity created, and so we're going to create a new entity with its ID. So the event will contain an ID. And component objects. So this will be event and components. So that creates an entity. I'm just setting up the listeners, and we're going to initialize the entity. And the init entity function in Synergizer runs through all the systems for the entities, and each of them will call their respective init entity. And then these are some other listeners. We're listening to the onPointer event, and we'll change that into a local pointer event. And if there's a pointer down and you hit something, that's a mesh picked event. Okay, that's really the gist of Synergizer. Let's look at least one, do some cleanup here, application of a system. So for that, we need to go into tests, and we can jump into the test using, go into the asset folder, and we'll do npm npx cypress open, and all the Cypress tests are in assets Cypress, and we'll just pick up one of them. First, let's see if the Synergizer test itself works, which is, it should. It just creates, in this test, we're creating a null engine. So you hand the engine into the synthesizer and you say my ID and then a list of systems, which there's no systems, and it just verifies that the scene is created. All right. So let's do end-to-end testing, and we'll open up Electron. And let's call this test. Oh, my server isn't running. Did that matter? I think we're probably fine, because it did not actually navigate to a site. It just ran the test. So the rest of them, I think, do an end-to-end testing. So all of these pass. So it creates a default camera, and it initializes systems given to it. So here we're giving it an I system, something that satisfies this contract, which has an init and a dispose at a minimum, and that it's in the systems now. Okay. Now for a single test, I will need to start up the server. Now there's an endpoint that we can reach through localhost 4000, and moreover, there is a special test endpoint that I put Synthesizer. The rest of the website is not yet using Synthesizer, and let's see what this test page does. So we have a new controller for the test, and so what we'll do here is we'll render this index page passing along member ID and token. And so let's take a look at this rendered page. So here, just a bit of styling to make it 100%. And we create a space canvas, ID of dummy, and make that stretch all the way out, and then we pass the member ID and the user token. And this test controller has a root layer of XR test root. So in here, we're putting in the same libraries that we would need in production on this test page. So we include the libraries for Babylon, Agora, and then everything else is coming from spec.js. So you might wonder where does spec.js comes from. So we're using esbuild to build our assets, and we just created a new target. So we have a target for app, and now a target for spec. And the entry point is just JS spec. JS spec right here. And so this will get compiled bundle. So here I have a couple of systems that I'll go over in a moment. We will load in this Synergizer, and when the DOM is loaded, we'll look for member ID on the window. If it doesn't exist, we'll return, and so this script won't do anything. Otherwise, we will get the canvas element with the ID dummy, and then we'll create a new Babylon engine with that canvas, and then we call the Synergize constructor with the member ID, that engine, and a list of the systems that we want to test, and it's all of those systems. So currently all the systems are loaded up. I did say each test could probably put in its own systems that I wanted to test, but I had some trouble doing that from the Cypress test because that's a different compiled environment. So it's not, if you're trying to do it on the test, you need it to be in the bundle, which I haven't yet figured out how to do. So just roll with this for a bit. And so let's look at shape. So shape so we pull in our own copy of Synergize just so we can talk about the same type when we load up the code in the console. So this is running a full browser, so we're going to use Cypress to visit the test URL. Then we click on the canvas, and then with the window object we say that the synthesizer object that was put on the window for debugging, we're going to assign that to Synergizer. And then so this is going to be available for our tests, and then we're going to say we can create a box. So we're going to test creating a new event. So entity created event. Okay, so this kind of event might be a bit old, but the idea was we go Synergizers, context, signal hub, incoming. We emit this for ourselves. So now it's not going to be an event, it's going to be entity created, and the event will be something differently now. So we'll want event const. Let's just say message. This will have an ID. Yeah. I think I can just modify this. Yeah, we don't need to follow this anymore, I think. That part's probably fine. There. Don't need this as any. This ID components ID not assignable to what? Not assignable to parameter of type ID string. And components is component objects and type of component shape are incompatible with these types because shape prim string prim param is not assignable to shape component type prim string. Prim params is not assignable to capsule shape. Type string is not assignable to capsule. What do you mean? Let's take a look at this really quick. Shape can be one of these, and capsule shape says prim capsule, and then you can have any number of these things. So I think that's fine. None of them are required. Params. This seems fine. And box shape, params. Yeah, all of these are optional. So what's the deal? Oh, it's saying string is not assignable to capsule because box is not one of them. Oh, okay. You're saying this is a shape component with this prim. No, I still don't get it. shape is something with a string. Components is made up of a string and component. Maybe I can just say this as a box shape. Cannot find name box shape. Quick fix, import, and we're good, I guess. Okay, so we're sending this event in, and we should be listening for that event, and then if we process it, then Synergizer's scene meshes should be equal to 1. And so let's try this test. Let's go to Cypress. We'll go up a level. So what do I click on? Go back to the specs. Yes. Click on shape. So now it should visit localhost 4000. And we visited, we got the canvas, we clicked, we got a window, and we asserted that 1 equals 1. And we can't see anything here, but we can do something else on the window console, which is Synergizer scene, or Synergizer just debug. So when we call this, it will actually open up the scenes debugger, and then if we click through here, you'll see that the box was created. And a box, and in fact, if we just back up a little bit, you see that box. There's no light, but already we see that a box was created in the scene. So there's a system there. There's a system called scene as a shape. So the shape system shape, it just has to implement this init function, which is to take in the context, and you can store the whole context, but right now it's just storing the scene. And then it receives the message. So every message processing through Synergizer is going to call the init entity. And then we say, if your entity has a component of shape, then store it in my list of entities that I want to keep track of, and create a mesh in the scene. So here we're only handling a certain couple of types. So here we're looking at the components data. If the prim matches one of those, then we will call a builder function that will just call defer to Babylon.js builder function, and then build it up. So you could actually do a couple of different things, like create a sphere. Let's go to the test again. So let's look at the shape. So this entire test runs in order for each of these blocks. So if I added another test, it would actually create 2 meshes right on top of each other, unless I give it also the position component, which would move that aside. So I can actually do that on position, and we'll just move it into the, okay, line can be there, and we'll just move it, I think 10 or 5 meters. And then we'll just copy this. And we'll create, this one can be just another random thing, but make it, this one a sphere. This one we can move to the side a bit. And then we emit this one. And this one should say 2, I think. This one should say you've got 2, so it should fail in the second test. Yep, expected 2. So this puts a sphere, and then you should have 2 meshes in this thing. Great. Okay, so that passed, and where is it? There it is. There is our sphere 5 meters to the right. Okay. We'll continue some other systems in another video.